I'm Farron Cousins, in for Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer. Heartburn medications have been linked to some very dangerous and often deadly side effects in recent years, and the latest drug linked to devastating side effects is the popular medication Zantec. Tonight, we'll tell you about the news surrounding Zantec and what consumers need to know to protect themselves from the dangers that are being uncovered. Also tonight, although debtor prisons have long been ruled unconstitutional, modern-day practices are still trapping people too poor to pay their medical bills and court fees. And later in the show, police departments across the country are facing lawsuits over their mishandling of rape cases, thousands of which go neglected for years before an investigation is opened. So don't go anywhere. America's Lawyer starts right now. Every day, millions of Americans take medication to reduce or eliminate heartburn. And unfortunately, the past few years have offered up nothing but bad news for some of the most popular heartburn medications out there. Recently, reports began surfacing about Zantec, saying that the medication contains a compound that increases the risk of cancer. Joining me now to talk about this is attorney Daniel Nye. So Daniel, let's start at the top now. What exactly is Zantec used for? What's the problem that we're seeing?
Well, Zantec is used for acid reflux, but the problem that we're seeing is that Zantec will break down, the molecule breaks down inside of the body into a very carcinogenic nitrosamine known as NDMA. This is a very toxic carcinogenic that can cause cancer in multiple organs inside of the human body.
So what kinds of cancer are we looking at here with this compound in there?
Well, there are multiples of them. There might be too many to list here today, but I'll tell you some of them that are probably the most concerning. First, bladder cancer, very concerning. There are studies out there already that may support a significant increase in the risk of bladder cancer from taking Zantec. Stomach cancer is another one that we're very concerned about because as you ingest Zantec and it breaks down inside of the stomach, we're seeing that there's potentially hundreds of thousands of NDMA nanograms inside of the stomach. So bladder cancer, stomach cancer, another one that we likely think is going to be is kidney cancer, prostate cancer. All of those very problematic if you're ingesting Zantec over a long period of time regularly.
And this is a drug, as I mentioned, millions of people take this. I mean, this is not some obscure prescription drug. This is over-the-counter. I can walk into a drugstore right now, the ones that still have it, and purchase this thing. But we have seen lots of stores yanking it off the shelves rather quickly here because they understand what's happening, right?
That's right. So there's this company known as Valashore that has filed a petition. They're a pharmacy company that'll test medications to see if there's impurities or carcinogens that are inside of a medication. So they actually seem to, I wouldn't call it discovered this problem, but really started to put attention on this problem with one of the petitions that they filed. You can look at this petition. You can see the evidence that they've combined from multiple past journal articles combined with their own lab testing that they've done on the medication, and you can see it's a substantial problem. That's why we think that people like CVS and Walgreens have immediately pulled this off the shelves because there's almost no doubt when you look at the data that's out there that this is a substantial health crisis, and that if you're taking Zantec today, I recommend that you go have a conversation about your doctor with it immediately.
Well, and so one of the things we saw originally was the FDA came out and said, oh, well, there's low levels in this. This may have been a few months ago, but then they came back and said, oh, we were wrong about the low levels. It's actually pretty significant. So that in and of itself is a pretty significant announcement from the FDA that typically isn't always that great on these drug recalls.
Well, the FDA hasn't been that great so far in really explaining what the issue is, and I think it's really important that the public understands this. There are multiple other countries out there that have taken much stronger action from their regulatory authorities because it seems like they've understand what the issue is. The FDA early on was taking a look at this and they were testing just the pill itself and they were seeing, is there any NDMA in it? And they were seeing low levels. That's not what the problem is. This is not a manufacturing contamination where NDMA is in the pill. The problem is the molecule breaks down inside of the body when it's combined with nitrates in the stomach. So if you eat pizza and you have a Zantec, which is one of the ways that it was advertised, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of nanograms breaking apart in the stomach when that occurs. Or our own DDH enzyme in our kidney or other organs may also be shearing off millions of nanograms of NDMA. So it's the way that the molecule breaks down inside of the body. It's not whether or not there's MDMA in the pill before it even breaks down. That's the problem.
So we're not looking at, say, something like valsartan. Valsartan is a drug that had become, I believe, contaminated with NDMA during the manufacturing process. That obviously caused a lot of problems. You've worked extensively on that.
Right.
This is one where almost because of what's in the pill and because of what's in the body, we've got chemical reactions taking place.
That's right.
That weren't necessarily, I guess, foreseen by the company. It's not something you can, as you said, find in the pill, but we've got to take better looks at what happens once you ingest this. It's not just what's in it, but there's chemicals in your body. There's, very real chemicals in these drugs.
That's right.
And chemicals react with one another. I mean, that's freshman year science there. We know this.
That's right. And a couple things, like, I'm not so sure if the company who first developed this GSK had no idea of this problem. We see, once we get into the internal documents in litigation,
Right.
We discover issues all the time about how they were hiding science. Some of the signals that I've seen in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if they were trying to bury science in this case. But, the other parts of it are, yes, it breaks down into potentially millions of nanograms inside of the human body. It's not like valsartan, where the contamination happened at a manufacturing facility. This is, the molecule itself is designed in such a way that it breaks down inside of the body, and it's been doing this since Zantec was on the market 30 years ago, over 30 years ago.
See, that's very interesting. So this is not just something, all of a sudden,
Right.
Zantac is a problem. No, Zantac's always been a problem. We're just now recognizing what the problem is and how, the science has evolved.
That's right. So people have been regularly taking Zantec. They may have been taking it for 30 years. They've been having, probably over those 30 years, it's been breaking down into hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of nanograms of NDMA inside of their body. That puts them at a very substantial increased risk of getting cancer because of that NDMA.
We've seen other proton pump inhibitors, Prilosec, Nexium. They've got their own problems, with kidney issues, kidney failure. This Zantac, this is a totally separate issue because I know a lot of people, when they look up heartburn medication lawsuit, they need to understand these are two separate problems, correct?
Completely. Now, I would tell you that PPI, that's a problem. But the cancer coming from Zantac, especially for people who are regular users for over 30 years, that's a health crisis.
And so one of the things that we need to know, if somebody's taking this medication, if somebody watching this, and I assume given the number of people who take this, somebody watching this has taken a Zantac in the last 24 hours, what do they do? What do they need to do? Who do they go talk to? What's happening?
Well, this cancer is not something you're going to get from one time that you take
Right.
the pill. Okay, this is something that's happening over a long period of time. So the viewers who are looking at this and they're worried that they took something in the last 24 hours, you're not going to be able to, get rid of the NDMA that's being broken down inside of your body. That one time you took the pill in the last 24 hours, that's not the worry. The concern is you've been taking this regularly over a long period of time, might even only be as much as over a year of time, to be able to develop this cancer. You need to have a conversation with your doctor about this problem and speak with your doctor about potentially switching to some other type of medication or some other way to treat your heartburn.
But probably a conversation that they need to have, sooner rather than later, right? Because this...
Absolutely.
Is there any bioaccumulation here? I mean, does the NDMA, does it get flushed out? I know it still causes the damage, but does it build up over time and stay there? Or does it kind of cause the damage and head?
It has a pretty short half-life. So in terms of the bioaccumulation, at these levels, I don't know that we're certain about what occurs. Now, what we do know is that when they measured the amount of NDMA inside of people's urine that were taking Zantac compared to those who were not taking Zantac, the Zantac users had over 400 times the amount of NDMA in their urine. So we know a lot of it flushes out, but we also know that if that much is flushing out, then there's a lot of it that's being absorbed inside of the organs before it gets outside of the body, like the bladder, the kidney, the stomach, those things that we talked about earlier.
Right. And so one last question, because we're dealing with science and the different foods you eat have different chemicals in them, does the diet also change how much NDMA may be in a person? I'm not asking for a specific list of bad foods, but would we see a difference in somebody who maybe has one diet versus another, both on Zantec?
You may. So people who have a lot of nitrites, like if they're eating pizza at the same time that they're taking an NDMA, we can see that they're gonna likely have hundreds of thousands of nanograms that are being broken down because of that. Somebody who happens to have a diet with virtually no nitrites probably may not be seeing the breakdown there, but they still might be seeing the breakdown because of their DDDH in their kidney. The enzymes there can also break it down. So I don't think they're in the clear. That's still something that we're very concerned about. Now, in terms of just people normal diets, I mean, if you have a lot of bacon in your diet, that's something that's been shown to increase your risk of cancer, just alone, without Zantec. What I will tell you, though, is the amount of NDMA in Zantec is thousands of times higher than any bacon.
Daniel and I, thank you so much for telling us the story. I know this science is very complicated, so thank you for helping break it down so that we can understand it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, we'll take a look at what many call a modern-day debtor's prison that's incarcerating people who can't afford to pay their medical bills, often outside the letter of the law. That and more when we come back.
Record everything he knew so that it would be out there regardless of what.
A new investigation reveals that medical debt collectors are getting judges to issue warrants for sick people who are too poor to pay off medical bills. RT's Brigida Santos joins me now from Los Angeles with more. So Brigida, tell me about this investigation. Where did it take place and what did you learn?
This investigation was conducted out of Coffeyville, Kansas, and it was published by the nonprofit newsroom ProPublica. It reveals how medical debt collectors are basically telling judges who to send to jail for the crime of being too poor to pay medical bills. And here's how it works. Defendants appear in court to testify to their poverty in what's known as a debtor's exam. They do this in front of a debt collector and a judge. That debt collector usually works on behalf of a hospital or a group of doctors or ambulance services, and they present the defendant with their options. The defendant can agree to a payment plan to have their wages or bank accounts garnished, or to have a lien placed on their property. Now, if defendants do not show up to any of these debtors' exams, the debt collector can then ask the judge to issue a warrant so that that debtor ends up in jail, and that's what often happens.
So medical debt in America is obviously a huge problem. So what kind of people typically get sued by these medical businesses?
I mean, all kinds of people get sued and arrested over medical debt. In Coffeyville, for example, there was a pregnant woman who was arrested for missing a debt collection hearing regarding a $230 radiology bill that she had not paid. There was a father of a boy who had leukemia. Now, he was arrested for being too poor to pay off his son's medical bills. And this list goes on. Some of these people are incredibly sick, and it happens all over the country. Meanwhile, debt collectors are profiting. In Coffeyville, one debt collector who was interviewed said that he charges his clients a commission rate of 1/3 of all the money that he collects. Now, some of that commission can even come from a defendant's cash bail, which is absolutely crazy. Now, in America, debt collection is an $11 billion industry, with medical debt accounting for almost half of all total debt payments collected each year. Medical debt is usually taken on by consumers without any knowledge of the actual costs, because our medical system is not transparent. People often don't know what they're going to be paying until they get that bill. And consumers often take on this debt knowingly because their lives depend on getting these treatments.
But debtors' prisons here in the United States, those were outlawed long ago, and the Supreme Court has ruled them unconstitutional. So in this particular circumstance, where's the oversight?
There really isn't much oversight. Now, the modern-day debtors' prison lives on, and we've talked about this on this show before, because judges can incarcerate defendants for failing to appear in court by charging them with contempt, or by ruling that a defendant is purposely not paying the debt rather than being legitimately too poor to pay it. And many judges themselves don't even have a law degree. Judge Casement was a cattle rancher. He was appointed a magistrate judge, even though he'd never previously taken law courses. And this is perfectly legal because Kansas does not require magistrate judges to have college degrees, and other states have very similar rules, so there really isn't much oversight.
Absolutely unbelievable. Brigida Santos, thank you very much for telling us this story today.
Thanks.
Women across the country are going to court in a sweeping demand for increased police emphasis on investigating rape cases, many of which have been backlogged and neglected for years by police departments. Legal journalist Molly Barrows joins us now to break this down. So, Molly, first off, explain to us what this rape kit backlog actually is. What does that mean? What's happening here?
So according to these criminal justice advocacy groups like End the Backlog, which I recently learned was actually founded by Mariska Hargitay, the actress from, SVU, Special Victims Unit on Law and Order. But it's essentially an initiative to bring attention to the fact that you have literally hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits in law enforcement agencies and in labs across the country. And they say it's a two-part problem, that there's no federal law mandating essentially the tracking and testing of these kits. And so they're being gathered in some cases and simply not sent to the lab for testing, or they're being sent to the lab for testing and they're not being prioritized for testing. So the result is the same, and that these test kits are sitting there languishing for, in some cases, years, actually collecting mold, and nothing's been done. So that's the problem in a nutshell of what this backlog is. And then the other issue is that it's the cost. So there's a number of reasons why law enforcement agencies say that these tests aren't being taken care of immediately, and it's that they don't have the resources or the personnel. But these women that are being victimized essentially by not having their rape kits tested aren't buying it, and so you're seeing a wave of lawsuits across the country.
So what are these survivors? What are they alleging against the police departments in court?
It's a number of issues. Most of these cases are actually being filed in federal court, and what they're looking towards is the Equal Protection Clause, basically saying that they're not being treated fairly. They're being unfairly discriminated against because of being a woman. Again, going back to police aren't prioritizing these for whatever reason. If they're blaming it on resources, they don't want to pay $1,000 to $1,500 per test to get it tested, or maybe they don't have the proper personnel trained. So that's what some of these lawsuits are saying, that they're basically neglecting to process these kits. They're not setting aside the resources. They're not properly training personnel. And essentially a wide group of people, victims, women primarily, are being discriminated against. So that's where the Equal Protection Clause comes in. They're essentially saying that by failing to test the kit, it's deliberate indifference.
Yeah. So what obstacles have we seen between, the delay in this, the statute of limitations, which is a huge issue we see in any kind of sexual assault case.
Right.
But it seems like delaying these or not prioritizing them, letting them languish and get moldy, as you pointed out, doesn't that kind of interfere with the statute of limitations a bit?
It is, and I think part of what you're saying is because this is they're breaking new ground for pursuing these cases. And so in some regards, courts are having to take a fresh look at the Equal Protection Clause. And if this is what a victim is in fact suing under, they're saying, well, you don't meet the criteria because of statute of limitations, or you don't meet the criteria because who are you comparing your group to? If you as women were discriminated against, that's part of the problem. There was one woman, a victim in San Francisco, who sued the San Francisco Police Department. She said she was raped after going to an outdoor city concert in 2010. She kept asking for 2 years, where's the results of my rape kit? It's a humiliating process, Farron. These women have to go to a doctor or a hospital, basically get swabs. You've already been through this traumatic experience, and then to go through this, and then you're waiting for the results because you want to file charges or you want to find out who your attacker was. In some cases, they don't even know. And on a tangent, by the way, going off on a tangent, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office got some money to help jurisdictions across the country to test some of these untested kits. And when they started doing that, they are clearing some of these cases in big ways. Like they cleared some 64 cases, including a case out in Arizona, which was the basis of another lawsuit. But going back to the San Francisco victim, she basically said, hey, why hasn't my rape kit been tested yet? And this was 2 years afterwards. Then 2 years after that, in 2014, she discovered there were hundreds of backlog cases, untested kits. And so that's when she filed this lawsuit saying, hey, this is discriminatory. You're not doing what you said you should do, and I'm being unfairly persecuted, and so are these other victims. And the district court said, well, your statute of limitations actually started when your rape kit was tested in 2012. It didn't start when you learned about the backlog in 2014. So going back to your point, what other avenues do they have? It's almost new ground. They're trying to figure out how to apply this law and if it does apply. And I think it's just a matter of the right case getting before the right judge in the right circumstances in order to make some headway. Because I think you saw with domestic violence victims back in the 70s and 80s too.
Well, and so in addition to going after the police departments here, is there any other groups that these survivors are going after?
The labs and their processes and how they determine and prioritize how cases should be tested. But for the most part, it's basically just all part of the criminal justice system in general. And so they're starting with these police departments because they're in these advocacy groups' minds, I should say, as well as the victims, they're looking at it like, hey, you have hundreds and thousands of cases potentially. They can't really tell because again, there's no mandatory reporting, but there's hundreds of thousands of cases backlogged across the country, and they're essentially saying, hey, if you're not gonna do something about it, then let me go to somebody else and have them do it so we can find out who did this and perhaps take a perpetrator off the street. They really don't have a lot of other options except to hope that other law enforcement will come in, like maybe a county district attorney's office or the Justice Department, for example. There was a raid back in 2007, apparently in the Chicago community, where the Department of Justice went in and found evidence that there were, into police, prosecutors, and public university officials in Missoula, Montana, and they found evidence that all three were violating the Equal Protection Clause by failing to respond to these sexual assault cases, and they signed legal agreements to change their practice. But since Trump has taken office, the Department of Justice has not been holding these law enforcement agencies accountable like they had before. So if there's no watchdog, these police are basically left to their own devices. And again, going back to victims saying, we go and file complaints and we get these direct responses from law enforcement. One woman, San Francisco victim, was saying that they told her she was menstruating and that she shouldn't have been out partying with the city, otherwise that might not have happened to her. And it's unbelievable that you hear these things. But this is the kind of situation that these victims are coming across, the type of interactions that they're having in some cases with law enforcement. And then the tangible result is these hundreds of untested kits. They're saying that's evidence enough that they're being discriminated against and nobody really cares.
Well, and I am the last person to ever be in favor of kind of privatizing something, but when you think about the fact that now we've got all these DNA companies out there. You swab your cheek,
Hey,
you send it in.
23andMe, you want to get in on the rape kit testing?
And in just a couple weeks, they send you back this thing, your entire family tree from your DNA. They have the resources in the private industry to do this, and it seems like this could be a decent opportunity, although that is also fraught with lots of legal questions too. But the technology is out there with these companies. And if we could, as a government, as a state government, federal government, whatever it is, find a good partner in this that's, one, not going to overcharge us on this, but two, also not sell this data to anyone else, which that in of itself is a problem.
You're so right.
We have these groups out there that are capable of doing this. They have the technology, and it seems almost stubborn that they will not help in these particular cases. These are serious issues. These are rapes.
Absolutely.
And we need to solve them, and they could be helping with this, and yet they want money.
Yeah, and if it's going to cost $1,000 to $1,500, then why can't you privatize it and basically have accredited agencies that go through whatever law enforcement standards are required in order to be able to be, testify in court that your results are legal and that they've gone through a certain process, because I think that's part of it. They need to have these accredited labs that are going to hold up in court with whatever their results are. But, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. I think these women don't have a lot of options, but we do have the technology to find out what the answers are. And as proven in that Manhattan DA's case, when he started putting money into these cases, they found serial rapists. I mean, that's what they found. And in some cases, for instance, the San Francisco case, again, when she did get her results back, it was a hit to someone that they didn't know. But in other cases, they're getting hits to where, oh my goodness, we're seeing a pattern here. This person victimized any number of women in a certain city or in a certain community, or they committed a different crime and now we've connected them. Just like they did with, I can't remember the serial killer, but out in California, when they basically used these DNA companies and found a relative based on DNA found on a victim of one of his crimes, and they went through that avenue. So if they can spend that kind of time and resources to find a serial killer on DNA, then it does lend credence to their complaint that, hey, you simply don't care. You're simply not prioritizing. And how do you prove that in court? So they're going at it with this equal protection clause, but the courts are saying, yeah, you're not quite there yet. You know, we're either going to put a wrench in the works by saying, what group are you comparing yourself to? How have you been harmed? How are you being treated any differently? What do you do as a woman who's not had their rape kit tested? Do you compare yourself to a man who's a victim of domestic violence as how police treated him? Where's the comparable group?
Right.
You know,
and that's going to be something that's difficult, but I think
It's
they've got a very
doable.
solid case here. So, Molly Barrows, thank you very much for telling us the
Thanks,
story.
Aaron.
And finally tonight, some good news. The state of California passed a law last week that officially bans the use of both private prisons and privately run immigrant detention facilities. The for-profit prison industry has spent millions of dollars trying to fight measures like the one that just passed in California, but even with their incredible political influence, they weren't able to escape defeat here. In study after study, private prisons have been shown to have higher rates of prisoner abuse, higher escape rates, higher staff turnover, more assaults on guards, and to top it off, they are, on average, costing taxpayers about 10% more to run than federal prisons. There isn't a single metric available to show that private prisons are better or more efficient than state-run prisons, and the only reason they've become so popular is because the private prison industry is pumping a lot of money into our politicians. But the move by California is certainly a positive step forward for prison reform, but it will likely also set up a fresh round of political contributions from prison companies who just want to protect their profits. And that's all for tonight. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook at facebook.com/RT America's Lawyer. You can watch all RT America programs on DirecTV, channel 321, and also stream them live on YouTube. I'm Farron Cousins, and this is America's Lawyer, where every week we tell you the stories that corporate media is ordered not to tell because their advertisers won't let them. Have a great night.